You're listening to The View from Up Here, an equipping podcast by Viewpoint Leadership and Development. Our vision is to cultivate a change in the way the world views leadership and development. And our mission is to foster better leaders through a modern approach while developing individuals into their true selves. My name's Brad Walbridge, your host for our time together. And joining me in our conversations is our president and founder, Josh Trout, and our COO, Joel Archeri. Welcome into the View from Up Here podcast. I want to welcome our viewers, our listeners. Brad Walbridge joined by Joel Archeri and Josh Trout. We're also joined, we have the privilege of having Mayor Rick Danner from the City of Greer, South Carolina. Just realized, I've heard people talk about it, but I didn't realize it was this significant. Greer is on the list, I don't know what number, but on the list of one of the top places to relocate to in the country. Is that true?
It is, yeah. And good morning, gentlemen.
Yeah,
welcome. Interestingly enough, we keep popping up on all sorts of lists, and the good list. The good list.
We'll watch out.
Start looking at the lists right now.
But in-migration is certainly one of those lists that we're showing up on a regular basis. We've been on the list of one of the fastest growing cities in South Carolina for probably the last 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years. But this is fairly new in terms of net in-migration. We are seeing a lot of folks from all over the country. I think they find the upstate. Certainly those kinds of lists include Greenville and sometimes Spartanburg.
Sure.
The story that I hear over and over again is from those people that live in other parts of the country and are job seekers and or trailing parents, trailing grandparents, following family, just looking for a new view. In society today, they may pick 3 or 4 regions they want to visit. They'll land in Greenville or drive to Greenville and spend 3 or 4 days long weekend there. Right around, they'll see Travelers Rest, they'll see Greer, Malden, Simpsonville, Greenville. Compare it against some of the others, and inevitably we see a lot of those folks wind back up in the upstate, and a lot of them reside in Greer.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I was one of them, so.
You're one of those.
Yes, both of us.
Yeah. And you've been mayor for, is it close to 25 years?
We're getting there. I was elected in 99 and took office in 2000, so starting the 23rd year.
You survived Y2K, wow.
Well, sort of, yeah. Ish. Yeah. So, yeah, it started in 2000. And Greer was a different place, quite honestly, than it is now.
Well, sure.
In 2000.
Even 10 years ago or 11 years ago, whenever I came here, it's a different place.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing just the last handful of years, the change that we've seen. What made you say, all right, I want to take this step into public office? Were you in public office before, or was the role of mayor, was that your first step into it?
I plunged in the deep end of the pool. That was my first foray into politics.
Okay.
It's a bit of a story, but I think it's one that's worth sharing. And I'm at an age now where, looking back, my vision has sharpened to 2020. And if I look at my life in a whole sort of holistic manner, it's easier to see now how I got to where I am. And I'm the oldest of 5 children, and I think part of my leadership came from that role, but it certainly was honed through the years, gravitating towards leadership positions in whatever I was involved in. If it was Boy Scouts, if it was the church, if it was school, if it was the YMCA, I just seemed to gravitate towards those types of positions. And that followed me through life. So even as I graduated from college and went into business in the Greer area, mentored with some of the folks from the chamber and others, worked with the Baptist Association while I was there. It just I sort of floated to the top, and a relationship with a couple of gentlemen in the Greer area that were serving really as sort of business and personal mentors to me planted the seed when they realized that the mayor from 92 to 2000 was going to not run for another term. They planted the seed, and I decided to run a very tough race against a local businessman, and the rest has been history, I guess, as they say.
Yeah.
But it was a love for the community as well too. My youngest son was involved in a serious accident at the end of our street. We live in downtown Greer, and he was going to a parade on one of the main streets there. It was the opening of baseball season, so he was 8 or 9 years old, and in his haste to get to the other side of the street and catch up with some of his buddies and stuff, stepped out in front of a vehicle and was seriously injured. And the period of time of his recuperation solidified my love for the city of Greer, because once he got home from the hospital after he spent a period of time in the hospital, I remember the first morning that I got up that he was home, as I traditionally did, I went out to get the newspaper. But this morning was different, because the minute I opened the door to my front porch, it was covered in casseroles and candy and food and baseball uniforms and signed baseballs and signed gloves, signed bats. And it was at that point that I said, I owe something to this community. Wow. This is I live here for a reason. And my wife was a lifelong resident. She'd been telling me all along what a great place it was, but it was just like, that's it.
Yep.
Stamp it.
Is that what has led to 20 plus years in the role? Did you ever imagine that you would still be doing this at this point? Or I mean, has it flown by, or has it been 20-something years and you feel every bit of it? Yeah.
I almost hate to say it, but there was never this grand plan.
Yeah.
I probably was overtly naive to running for mayor. This whole idea about why don't you run for mayor was like, that sounds like a good way to practice public service and to extend my leadership skills and that sort of thing. But I realized very quickly after having been elected that there's a lot more to it than you think. And I suspect a lot of us have sort of had those kinds of awakenings in our lives, what turned out to be, what was a good idea in the beginning turned out to be maybe more than we thought. And in fact, I realized in that first year that I was mayor that as a self-employed person that this was really going to be hard to juggle. And we were in some very difficult financial straits at that point in time as a town. That things were not well. And I was very fortunate to be able to sell a business that I had and to transition into a community position through a local bank and to be able to work with the community. And the question about whether or not there was there was this vision of long-term service, I don't know that there was, but as long as I felt like as long as I feel like I'm able to continue to make a difference for our town and our city, and I enjoy it, and I'm healthy, and honestly, my wife will let me because it's very time consuming in a lot of regards. Sure. It's just, yes, it's flown by in a lot of regards. And I am getting to the point that I've got to make some decisions. My next term will end at the end of next year, and so I've got to decide if I'm going to run again this coming year for mayor, which I intend to do, which will be another 4 years. But I'll have to make some decisions in that period of time about whether or not I want to continue.
Yeah. When you look back to the first few years, I'm thinking of, as you were saying, Greer was in a very different place. financially, the infrastructure, businesses, all of that, people moving to the area, none of that is happening at that time the way that it is now. Those first few years, you step into that role. What does it look like to build relational capital with members of the community, with businesses who don't really see you the way that they see you today and have the trust that they have today? How do you start building that relational capital with people? You have a staff that you lead, but then there's people you're responsible for that you're leading who don't necessarily work for you and are not just going to do what you say.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about leadership in a political environment.
Yeah.
Fortunately, in most smaller cities in South Carolina, it's nonpartisan. So I don't have to declare a party in the race. And I think that was intentional by design when home rule came about in the very early 70s, because we had come from an environment where counties had supply bills and it was doled out to the different cities and that sort of thing. And this was to help with some of the issues that had happened in the past. And so one of the things that I think has helped me and a lot of other sort of small town mayors has been that you get to demonstrate that you've got the best interest of the city at heart rather than an ideology or a party or that kind of thing. And we had gone through sort of a rough spell as a community there in the late 90s. I think there was some vision that the coming of the BMW plant and some other big announcements that happened, in the late 80s, early 90s, and certainly through the 90s, that it was going to be the cure-all sort of for all of the issues that had happened, particularly during that time where a lot of other southern cities and cities across the nation is textiles offshored and a lot of the other businesses left, and we were and still are in some regards a textile community. The bottom dropped out for a lot of those communities, and I think we thought, that the BMW announcement and some others were going to, we completely change things around, and while it certainly helped, and we never can discount the impact that it had, it was a bit of a slow slog, and at one point in time, we had the city, we had the chamber, we had the Commission of Public Works, and sort of everybody was doing their own thing, and there was a group of people that realized that if we're really going to make this happen, we're all going to have to at least march in the same direction. And there was a plan and a public-private effort that came from that had a vision for where we wanted to go, and were it not for a little bit of a slow start due to paralysis by analysis, if you know what I mean. Once we got off the ground, it helped move us in the right direction.
Yeah. Josh, you've had a lot of interaction with Rick and just working in the community and doing various things. What has your impression been of Greer and the work that he has done and people you've interacted with? Tell us more about that.
So I moved here from Pennsylvania, so I'm a northerner, and I say y'all now, so hopefully that makes me somewhat southern.
We're grafting
I used to be
in.
Yinzers, but now I'm from Pittsburgh, so
grafted
Yins. So no, but what's quite amazing is it just seems like everything Greer does is just right. I think that is not everybody will probably agree with me on that, but as an outsider looking in and being here and coming from Pennsylvania, which myself and my family were very involved in our local town, and I was very interested in politics myself, and I saw how things were happening in Pennsylvania, to coming to Greer, you just do it right. Whether it's you or it's whatever portion of Greer. And I love how everything is just surrounded by community. I think, and I love what you just said, I think when you bring politics into it and parties, it just tarnishes a lot, right? And, not having that in there, and you're coming in as one community and getting buy-in, you're going to have people that aren't always going to agree. We know that, right? But I just think it's amazing that, going down there we were just talking about the Christmas tree lighting. and just seeing the amount of people that show up for that, and the smiles on their faces, and then the professionalism of your local police department, which is top notch, and your fire department and EMS, and the local churches, and it's just done right, and you just don't see that often, And coming from the North, I'm not trying to badmouth the North, you just don't see that. You don't, because the sense of community just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It doesn't, which was one of the main attractions to come here. And you're right. I came down here for Greenville, and I said, whoa, look at Greer. This place is awesome.
Yeah.
It's a real-life Hallmark movie, to the point of now you're literally filming movies in town.
Seriously.
Seriously. So it's quite amazing. And I think that's why I wanted to meet you when we first met, because to do that in a community as big as the community is, to do things the right way, but yet to have the community so tight, someone at the top is doing something right. And that I applaud you for that. And I know it's not just you.
Oh, no.
But you have to have a leader leading all those people. So that's what attracted me to Greer.
When you say doing things the right way, it makes me think about Muncaster Financial Group, doing things the right way. Great friend of the show. Also, Synergy Coffee always does things the right way.
Yeah.
That's right. Nice plug.
I do it again.
Rick, when you think about some of the key turning points along the way over 20 plus years that you've been at the helm, and as Josh was saying, a lot of people involved in the process, and people that work professionally for the city and around it, but also just volunteers and people just very passionate about their community. Can you think of a couple of key turning points that stand out to you that if those things don't happen, Greer's not where it is today?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's markers all along the way. And I want to follow up on one thing you just said a minute ago. We're unapologetic about the fact that we are a small southern community. And I think that authenticity is what has been the glue that has stuck us together through all of this. We're a town that has a real heritage of a faith background, of a high school football background, of a family background, even around the mills, the camaraderie that came from those folks that lived in those communities and worked together and that sort of thing. And I think it's, for lack of a better word, just kind of in our DNA. And I think that's what's brought us together, kept us with a vision of the future, and we still stand on that today. And then it goes on to these markers that I was just talking about, because from being elected, and taking office the first of the year, and then realizing within 2 weeks that we were going to have to borrow money to make the payroll kind of thing, to where we are now, comes from, number one, vision, and number two, planning, and number three, having the right people in place to do it. And that's what's got us to where we are. Part of that original plan that was done in 98 and then began to be implemented in 2000 was a long-term plan that we had engaged the community and the private sector in, and also brought in some consultants to help us with. Identified a number of different things, but one of the things that they identified was that part of the issue that we were having at the time was, even though we were small at that point in time, we didn't have a city hall that people said, well, that's the city hall, or that's the place you go to do business with the city. Sure. And we had fire in one place, police in another place. City hall was in an old post office. We were probably renting 7, 8, 10 buildings at the time just to have the different departments in and all that sort of thing. And so our council said, okay, let's figure out what we want to do. This is what I really like about our council and our community. It took us 7 years from that point in time to where we were ready to move into a building to make sure that we did it right, that we were going to be able to pay for it, and it was what we wanted, and it was going to
maintain.
be workable for the next 50 to 75 years.
Sure.
And in our case, it was a vision of a building that would serve the public in more ways than one. It was not going to be a Taj Mahal. In fact, the design of the building is intentional to look like a textile mill. It's got a tower on one end with a clock. It's brick. It's got large windows, wooden staircases, the whole 9 yards. And in the whole second floor of the building is public space. I don't know that you've ever been in there, but you can open it up into 3 different rooms. You can open it up into 2 rooms. You can open the whole thing up into 1 room. It's a rental venue as well too. The public owns that portion of the building, and so we surrounded it with a 12-acre park and an amphitheater, so that we created a sense of place that was instant. And the credit goes to our council and to the leadership in the community, because we were talking about when we decided we were going to do it, where were we going to do it? And there was a push among some of our community that it needed to be on Highway 29, because obviously that's where all the traffic is, and that's where people would be driving the most. And our council and part of our community said, no, this is a downtown entity, and they were absolutely correct, particularly with the park, because it's the anchor to our downtown now. And, and for us to say, this is the heart of our city, and if our downtown is going to be the actual heart of it, this is part of the heart of the city. And I think that was one of the things.
And it's a spectacular park. For those of you who have never been to Greer, you have to stop at the park.
Now we're going to have a bunch of people moving.
Well, you can see it too. I mean,
all because
come
of
to Greer.
What I love just listening to everything you say, and we were talking about it with our last guest, Jay, is intention. But to have intention that then leads to a positive legacy, there has to be humility and grace and integrity behind the intention. And everything you've said, everything that we've seen, even just in what you're talking about with the location of City Hall and the park, like there's integrity. There doesn't feel like it's jostling for, oh, I'm more important than the other person, or, Greenville versus Greer. It's like, it's all about how can we, as a rising tide, raise all the ships. And that's what has always drawn me towards Greer as someone who's a plant down here too. Like when my wife and I are looking at where are we going to go when we eventually actually buy a house, we want to, as best as possible, stay in Greer. We have to. It's almost like we have to. We can't think of any other location because Greer's the best place to live.
I'll agree. I mean, we're not going to get any argument on this end. We've had a couple of others through the years, but none. The City Hall and Park was the anchor and part of that heart that I keep talking about. The other one, without a doubt, is the streetscape project that we did. In 2009, started in 2019 and finished in 21. Intentional by design. This was a project that started out as a good, simple idea. We were just going to repave the street.
Add a little lights on the top.
Well, we were going to, plant a few new trees, fix some cracked sidewalks and repave the street.
It seems like it grew into something more.
Absolutely. It's one of those things like renovating your house. You're just going to do the bathroom, or you're just going to do the kitchen, and 5 rooms later you're finishing up. We were going to repave the street, and the public service, the folks over at the Commission of Public Works said, hey, listen, we've got sewer and water under Trade Street that's going on 100 years old. If y'all are going to repave the street, how about let us get in there first and put in all new pipes, and we'll do all the infrastructure. We'll drop the electric and underground, that kind of thing. And it was like, well, okay. And then we said, well, if they're going to do that, we're going to need to do some new bump outs for outdoor dining. And why don't we change the landscaping while we're at it? Okay, we can do that. And then we said, well, why don't we do something that's a little different than anybody else has got, and what's that look like? And we engaged with some folks that we had do some consultation work for us, and they said, well, let us show you some things in different places in the country and in the world that have worked. And next thing you know, we were in a 2-year, $15 million project on 3 blocks of our downtown that, and this is one of the things I'm most proud of, was for all intents and purposes 1.5 years, almost 2 years of construction. Nobody during that project was without the use of their front door more than 72 hours during that whole project.
Wow.
Love it.
That's amazing.
A lot of them had back doors and had to utilize those in some cases, but we literally worked with our contractors and said, this is going to be a fully functional working area while y'all do this work.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen it, it's a solid surface from building face to building face.
Yeah.
And what we did was we took an auto-centric downtown street and we flipped it into a pedestrian-centric street that kept two-way traffic and parallel parking, plus widened the sidewalks enough to have outdoor dining.
It's masterful what you did.
it-
Can I walk in the street though? Am I since it's pedestrian?
Go ahead and try it.
Hey, it depends on what vehicle's going by and whether they let you.
That's true.
That's it.
Well, that's all actually part of the design, because what we did, we're in a turn of the century classic, neoclassic southern downtown.
Right.
Whole downtown was built somewhere between the 1900s and 1930s for the most part. If you look, all the bricks the same, all the designs the same. There's not a building down there over 3 stories. It's got this just fairy tale kind of charm about it. It's intact. There are no missing buildings. But it had that limitation of the fact that building face to building face, you were only about 60 feet. So you had these 5-foot wide sidewalks. You had a parallel parking space. You had two traffic lanes in there, and so there really wasn't any room to do anything. And by taking it completely out and going back with this, what's called a solid surface, in this case brick, you take your 2 driving lanes and you narrow them down to the absolute minimum, 11 feet or something.
Yeah, your truck barely fits.
Which causes traffic to intentionally slow down,
Yeah.
but it gives them still the room to parallel park, but it also allows you to take your sidewalk from 5 feet to 10 feet. And now you feel more comfortable walking down there because the traffic's slower and people are more intentional about it. And what we have found is the idea was to make it a pedestrian-centric, but even beyond that, to your point, and we still laugh about it, people go shopping in one store, they come out on the sidewalk, they look down up the street, and somebody in the group says, oh, I'd love to go to that dress shop right there across the street. Well, they're not going to walk to the corner to go to the dress shop. You're going straight across.
Right.
And that's not intentional by design, but it happens because people feel so comfortable in the environment.
Yeah.
If you can hit on to something I really loved about the plan was there's no curbs, and I know one of the reasons, if I'm correct, was because of this thing called down on trade. Can you share about that? I mean, because I think where did that come from? Because I enjoy it. I love going down on trade.
Yeah. The design is not unique, because if you've been to Italy or France or Germany, you'll see this same example that dates back to 1600, and it's where they had the cobblestone streets that were flat across. Over time, they turned into brick streets that are flat across. The whole idea was that we enhance the pedestrian experience, but we also now have the ability to use the street for functions. Plus, it also now becomes a handicap barrier-free environment as well too.
Yep.
So the idea was that we can now take any one individual block of that street and block it off for a special event, 2 blocks or the entire 3. And it also allows people to move sort of freely in that area without closing it off. One of the real travesties, I think, are cities that have tried, and mostly unsuccessfully, where they take a main street and they close it off and try and create a mall environment. and Memphis, and I'm not throwing down on Memphis, but they did that with a portion of their downtown, and it essentially killed it. It just didn't work. But for us, and particularly leaving the traffic in there, it's turned downtown into a regional, if not national, destination.
Yeah. And I want to make one point, because we've talked about generational aspects of leadership and impact. And what was interesting is, because now you have Instagrams for Greer. Like I think it's What's Up Greer, Greer Tidbits, like this kid who's now like all about showing Greer. And you had no idea, because social media didn't exist when you came up, at 20 years ago. You're like, I want to help. I have a heart for this place. Let's revitalize. Let's do all this. You didn't know that 20 years down the road, 5 years down the road, someone on social media would make it their passion to promote this place of Greer. But I think it's just, once again, it's a testament to the integrity and intention that you use and that you lived with as you led in your position as mayor, that it's, we don't always have to think like, so we talked with Jay, we don't always have to think, how can we impact the younger generation? It's live with integrity, lead with integrity, and then those who respond to that in kind will do so, and it will happen. You don't have to have an agenda towards that. And what's so been beautiful, it's the same thing for all you guys who are listening. If you lead like that, the younger generation who are receptive to that, who are the people you want to be receptive to that, they will be receptive. They will then react and live as a result, and will promote what you are wanting them to promote. And just like this has happened, this person, you didn't say, hey, can you find someone to do the Instagram for us? It'd be really great. This kid just took it upon himself, and it's become a thing.
Yeah, and the thing that we have come to realize is that vision and that planning and that execution has paid off in more ways than just convenience.
Right.
We have developed, the city has developed this niche now for being a place to have weddings. It's created its own industry downtown. So we now have 2, 3, 4 professional photographers that are housed downtown. We have probably 4 to 6 private venues downtown for events and functions. We now have our first full-on wedding dress shop downtown, where we've had support kind of businesses. It snowballed because of the number of weddings that we were having downtown, and the people that on social media were showing their wedding or their event or whatever, and it's it's created something that we may not originally have thought about, but has come about because of what we've done.
Well, we're an example of that. So if you go on our website,
that's true. Our pictures,
all of our photos, our headshots, our live photos and stuff like that were all done in downtown Greer, because there was no better landscape, we felt. Number one, we're housed out of Greer, but it was just something that we loved to have as a backdrop, because it's beautiful. Yeah.
Rick, all these things that we are just loving about Greer, I'm imagining you got no pushback over the years on any of these projects. Is that true? Any pushback?
Well, what's the old saying about the turtle? I mean, he doesn't get anywhere until he sticks his neck out.
Yeah.
You've got to be willing to take some chances.
Yeah.
And that's any business. It's life. And there are going to be people that are going to be the doubters, and there are going to be the people that are going to be the haters, and all that sort of thing. I think, though, that through commitment and certainly success, that people are less resistant in some regards to change, particularly when you're talking about doing the kinds of things that we have done. I think you can build that trust in some regards. Yeah. Now, nevertheless, there are going to be the naysayers, and one of the things that we have run into, and I think any growing city probably would, is that there are going to be some of the folks that remember the good old days in some regard, and nothing's going to ever be better than it was in 1957, when the streets were packed with people shopping, and there was 8 barbershops on the street and that sort of thing. But I think you build your credibility, through the projects that you do, and certainly the successful projects that you do. And our community has embraced what we have done so far, and it's easier to do now that we've got some experience under our belt and some really good projects under our belt. But in a community growing as fast as we are, the number one thing that we will deal with now and in the future is going to be growth and the issues that come with that in some regard.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
When you think about the fact that all this time, all this energy has gone into planning the various things that have happened in the city over the years, and you engage someone or a group of people who are level-headed, they're not screaming at the top of their lungs crazy, they bring some good opposing arguments or concerns about what you're doing. As a leader, how do you engage that well, where you might not come out at the other end with them agreeing and being supporters, but how do you engage that well as a leader with integrity?
Well, you have to, and it's critical. There's an old saying, the wheels of government turn slow for a reason. And I think the reason is, unlike, our structure is very similar to a private business. The council serves as sort of the board of directors, and you have an administrator who is the CEO, and the board or the council sets the directives. The CEO's in charge of the staff. So that sort of pyramidal design is not different. The way we go about it is entirely different, because with a private company, decisions are made and action is taken typically fairly quickly in that environment, and it is a closed group of people that make that decision.
Right.
With the council, you've got, in our case, 6 members of council from single-member districts and myself, so 7 people that are making decisions based on representing their individual districts, and then a staff to deal with as well, too. The other thing is, in government, we don't have unrestricted access to funding like a company might have to put something in place and to see it through. So these projects that we've been talking about, the timeline on those is anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 years to 7 or 8 years. My ability to have several of these under the belt comes from longevity, and that's the only reason. It takes us that amount of time to get these lined up, and so I think that hearing folks out and understanding what their issues and their problems are sometimes is beneficial, because oftentimes it's not as much to the project as it is to a philosophy or a reason or something else that they're bothered about. Well, it's going to raise my taxes. No, not necessarily. It's not going to raise your taxes, or whatever. And there's a lot of that you can address.
Sure.
Yeah. Any other thoughts that you guys have as we wrap up our time with Rick?
I'm blown away. I keep trying to say, I'm going to take notes when to clip things, and I'm just literally enthralled with everything he's talking about.
Yeah, I think I have one question. I think as a leader, making a very big decision can be difficult at times, right? So when I sit there and think about Greer's known for its beautiful community and all those things we've talked about, but you had this monster business that came from overseas and decided to land inside of Greer, which is known as BMW.
How dare they?
Which is great. I mean, it's a great thing.
Great cars.
And
we would love them to be sponsors of the show.
I'll take an MA at any time.
Alpina, baby.
But I'm sure it was very small compared to what it is today. I mean, just since I've been here in the 2 years, you're seeing it's just blowing up. How was that? Leading that process from the city perspective with this monster company coming in. I'm just interested to see how you had to kind of navigate those waters.
It's interesting because the BMW plant is not inside the city of Greer. There was arrangements made, obviously, at the state level and county level about taxing entities and all those sorts of things. So by design, it's not inside the city.
Okay.
Neither is the airport, and we hadn't even touched on some of the things around Greer that I think make it so successful in the international
Beautiful
airport as part of
We
that.
just need to have you on again so we can talk more.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah,
We'll have
we
to
can
do
do
that.
I-85 and 26, the inland port. People have
Huge.
no idea.
I still don't
about-
understand that. I
Yeah.
do need you to explain that to me. I don't know what an inland port is.
That entity is
don't understand.
is probably going to change the upstate more than anything else, even potentially as much as BMW.
Wow.
None of those are literally in the city. So while I have interaction with those folks and that sort of thing, me and the council are focused on the city and the role we play and those things that we can control, because a lot of that other stuff is just
Okay.
out of our purview. I think the thing for me is that when we get to those inflection points in those decision times is I'm the only elected official that represents the city as a whole. So those 45,000, maybe close to 50,000 people now, regardless of who you are, my decision reflects their best interest. And while I may have my largest contributor in my ear telling me that he or she would like it done this way, or that the guy that owns the big company out here needs this done.
Listen, I would like to give you this if you could just listen for 1 second. Just listen to me.
At the end of the day, I've got to be comfortable that the decision I made was in the best interest of that community.
That's
Makes sense. That's awesome.
it.
Thank
I
you.
did have one
Thanks for
question.
sharing.
You're an avid gardener. Is there a specific brand of tools you use for your gardening? Or are you like,
We're
mixed
getting
bag, I
deep.
don't care? You have a green thumb. You said it yourself. You stripe your grass a
Ryobi's
certain way.
down the road, right? So
Yeah. So, what tools do you only use? Brand-wise.
I'm not a brand guy necessarily.
Spoken like a true politician.
I'll buy to what I need. My biggest dilemma right now is when do I make the leap to the battery stuff, because I'm still an old gas guy.
gasoline.
And the battery stuff quality has caught up.
I've got a nephew that's a builder, and he's a Makita man, and he's on me all the time about Makita and their electric stuff. I've got to make that change at some point in time, but
It's tough.
it's tough.
It's tough because there's something about the smell too.
Yes.
Gasoline and
Yes.
oil.
Well,
Yeah, that's true.
gas hedge trippers are, it's just something like having those in your hand.
Yeah.
Whipping through some big tall bushes.
Yeah.
I wonder if I get the same charge from as I would from my quiet as a mouse,
Yeah, no,
electric
you're not quite
hedge
as-
clippers.
That's good
No.
stuff.
So
sure
you
your
handle
neighbors
all
would
the
appreciate it.
landscaping?
Yeah, my neighbor.
Your neighbors
my
would like
neighbors
it.
would appreciate
So
it.
do you handle all the landscaping for downtown Greer?
No.
Just
I'll-
see you out there?
I'll throw a good idea out every now and then, but yeah.
Just see Rick out there with his hedge
He's
trimmer.
just walking around.
I appreciate what our
That's a
myself.
dedicated
appreciate
man.
what our staff does. And I will say this, we hadn't talked about it. We have got the absolute best staff anywhere in South Carolina.
Absolutely. They're great people.
I will put our employees up against anybody in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, we've had 2 or 3 police officers retire here during the change at the end of the year. We had a group of guys that all started about 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Every one of them salt of the earth. It's been amazing watching these retirement receptions that we've been having, because these guys have touched so many people through the community and have done so much for our community. We'll have 150, 200 people show up for a retirement for a
amazing.
police
Wow.
officer.
It's a class act department. It really is.
And when you get that kind of people that show up just to shake hands with somebody and tell them thank you for what they've done, I think that probably would go throughout our entire department. But that's just the example that I know of right now. And to hear the testimony of folks about not just that they were a good cop, but they were a good friend, that explains why we've got such a good group of employees.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really can see the next episode, having you back and talking
Yes.
about the threads that go into other parts of the community and just some of these layers that we haven't gotten a chance to. But
Also explaining
we're
what an
fascinated.
inland port
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, we hadn't even scratched the surface.
No, we haven't.
I don't understand that.
But all three of us have been directly impacted in a number of ways by the city and the efforts of decades of work and then some, and countless volunteers and staff members that have contributed to that, and we're grateful.
Yeah.
And we're grateful for your leadership, and we definitely want to continue to unpack that if you're willing.
Be glad to.
That's
Great
awesome.
studio and great fellas. Thank
Great.
y'all.
Oh,
we
we
really
did it
appreciate
fast.
it.
We
Yes.
did. Well, thanks to our viewers and our listeners. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode.